All right. Good morning, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. We have a very special treat for you. Welcome to our Let's Talk program. It's hosted by, of course, us, the Community Foundation, your Community Foundation of Tompkins County. This is a really special edition. Twice a year we do this before each grant cycle. So our spring grant cycle and our fall grant cycle. We do this, information exchange opportunity, and we're joined today by Stacey Murphy, Ithaca's resident grant expert and consultant. Stacey's been doing this work for a really long time, and we're honored that she answered our request to host this workshop. And as part of our commitment, as the Community Foundation, our partners, our community advocates, change makers, all of you wonderful people on this call, and everyone who is watching, those that serve our communities, this workshop is part of the many ways that we help to build capacity in your organization and going beyond the grant check. This grant cycle, and for all future grant cycles, will offer a workshop like this. We do offer a grant cycle Q&A with me, which is actually tomorrow. We offer the opportunity to meet with me one-on-one, to review your application, go over any questions that you may have. And new to this cycle is a coffee hour. I'm sorry, not a coffee hour, but a coffee chat. So an opportunity to chat with me. I'll be at Dunkin' Donuts from 12:30 to 1 on Tuesdays up until the grant cycle ends. October 11th, I'll post more about that towards the end. So we are here again. This is information exchange. Feel free to enter your questions in the chat. So go ahead and enter them there. And as we move along, you can enter them in the chat. And then at the end, we're going to review the questions that were submitted ahead of time, and also the questions that you submit in the chat. We're going to go over that towards the end. So this is an hour-long presentation, and our time together. So usually it's 30 minutes, but it's been extended until 1 p.m. So if you do need to leave at 1 p.m., you can just excuse yourself. Don't feel bad. You have things to do. We understand. Also in the chat, I'll post a link to it if you miss any important questions that we'll go over. Welcome to everyone that's just coming in. This and other Let's Talk recordings will be available on our website later today. And Stacey, thank you so much for joining us today and making our community partners a priority and sharing your wealth of knowledge with us all. So without further ado, Stacey, it is all yours.
Stacey's having fun with her slides. Yeah. All right. So, all right.
Everything is working today. Everything is working.
Thanks, Gloria and George, and to the Community Foundation, and to all of you for your time today. It's nice to see some of your names and faces. I know some of you I don't know and haven't met, but I thank you all for your time today. So just a little bit about me and what I do. I started my business in 2012 after 18 plus years in nonprofit management, some of it locally here in Ithaca, some of it prior to moving here in central Pennsylvania. In the time since starting my business, I've raised about 70 million-ish, a little bit more than that in that time, and tend to have success in about 2 out of 3 of the grants that I write with different organizations. I work with nonprofits and some small colleges and municipalities sometimes, and occasionally small businesses. And I'm very glad to be here today and looking forward to helping you and hopefully answering a lot of your questions. I know this is sort of a session that's geared towards beginners. Oh, honestly, I'm so sorry. And I is doing this. Okay. I apologize. Okay. This is sort of a list of the topics, and this is crazy. I don't know why this is doing this. Okay. Okay. So there's some central themes we're going to try to hit on. If this will Okay, and hang on. We're gonna do it this way, because this way I can control the slideshow a little bit better. I'm very sorry, everyone. Hopefully you can see this like this. I'm gonna reshare my screen in just a moment. I'll be right with you. Okay, so you're going to see the headings, and I'm very sorry about that, but I want to make sure that I can move through these for you. So the basics I want to hit on are sort of these general themes that you see in front of you now. We'll be describing some of these in more detail. Some of them will just sort of become apparent in what we're talking about. As Gloria mentioned, she did gather a bunch of questions ahead of time. That was great. And some of them I'm going to try to work the answers into as we go, just to leave a little bit more time at the end. I know some of you are pretty well versed in grant work already. Some of you may be new, and some of the questions that were coming in are a mix of those things. So I am going to try to move through this matter pretty quick because of the time limitations we have. Please do ask questions at the end, and I am available afterwards for more questions if anybody has any at all. And just to kind of start the process off, one of the questions somebody sent in, they wanted to know if the process in applying for grants is much different for for-profits versus nonprofits. And I would say sort of in terms of these general ideas and concepts, overall, the concepts are very much the same. Also too, in terms of sort of, they'd asked about in applying to state grants. In terms of sort of the New York State of things, the process is also very similar because funders want to know what they want to know, just in spite of who's asking. There can be some differences in terms of what's available to nonprofits versus businesses. I mean, I would say that the breadth of funding sources for nonprofits is much wider than that for businesses. Because for businesses, they tend to be available for more limited purposes or in more limited fields. And if there are more questions about that, we can handle those at the end. Do hope you're able to see these. Okay. So some basic elements of becoming grant ready is a good place to start. A lot of times when I start with an organization, we pull together these elements so that way when an opportunity comes up, they're able to respond, or I'm able to help them respond. Because a lot of times you're going to have a limited amount of time to respond to a grant opportunity. And the more you can have some stuff available ahead of time or understand what the themes are, it'll help you navigate a very busy grant season if there's more than one opportunity you're applying to in a period of time, or it will just help you be ready when the time comes. And so this general list here, things like your board list, financial information, stuff that you upload. If you have a place on a server or a folder where you can keep all that, it'll help you be ready when the time comes. And also some of this information helps you get your head around a program. Like if you're applying for funding because you want to start a new initiative or you want to do something you've never done before, this process can also help you with starting to think about how do you show what your need is, and how do you talk about what your timeline for doing the project might be, things like that. So all of these things are good to gather. Testimonials are nice if what you're doing is a project and you want to have some information that shows you're standing in your community and how you help. Timing considerations is on here because those can be important too, especially in terms of specific grants, sometimes at the state level or the federal level. For example, there's CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, is one that for housing grants that I used to write a lot of. Those are things that municipalities apply for, or municipalities in conjunction with a nonprofit partner. And to apply for those, you need to have evidence that you've had a public hearing. Well, to have a public hearing, you have to understand when the town board meets. and you have to understand what the requirements are to advertise the public hearing ahead of time. So you need to sort of be ready ahead of time to meet all those things, or else you're not going to have everything you need by the time you apply. Some grants require you to have sign off on your board. So there needs to be a board resolution. So you need to sync up when your board meetings are with when this thing is due. So it's all important stuff to consider. Okay, so to go along with that, you will find over and over again when you apply for grants that the questions are very similar. You probably have if you've done these before. And again, these are things that you can have ahead of time. A lot of these things are things you might have already in your public materials, like your website, in things you share out in annual reports. And they also are other elements that often come up if you do other kinds of fundraising. A lot of organizations, most organizations that I know of, don't do just grants or just fundraising. There's some mixture of both that feed the revenue stream for your organization. So a lot of the kinds of things that you would pull out now to put together a real good narrative to describe your project also may tie into what like maybe a case statement for a capital campaign, or even just your annual fundraising appeal materials. It's good to have the things agree, because that way you're putting out a uniform message about your organization. And also, again, just in terms of readiness and efficiency, it helps you be ready. In general, it's a good idea to use a storytelling format, especially when coming up with some of the things that have to do with your evidence of need. Why are you doing this program? Why right now? When they teach reporters how to report, even like going back to high school English, you might remember things like you want to include who, what, when, where, why, and how. That's very much the same thing for grant proposals too. You want to talk about all of your organizations and think ahead about how you would answer some questions like, what would you do with less funding? What would you do without the funding? These are all things. How will you sustain your program when the funding runs out? Some of these, it's a good to think about ahead of time and get some answers in mind, because they will help you run your program and also help you answer these questions in a grant application. So sort of like, those are all the basics. But if you want to put together a good project narrative and a good project description, I like to think of a good way to do it is to think of it in terms of how you incorporate these ideas. So first of all, just curious in the chat, if you know who came up with these ideas, ethos, logos, and pathos. If you know and you want to put it in the chat, go ahead. Just a little bit of trivia for a minute. If you don't know, that's okay too. Anyone want to guess? Aha, yep. Plato, Socrates, Aristotle. Yes, it was Aristotle. Congratulations, Barb. Yes, they are the three artistic proofs, or ways to persuade an audience about something. As you know, all of those, everyone that you mentioned, they all were like, the forefathers of philosophical thought and arguments and things. But these were Aristotle's idea. And they kind of all come down to the idea, understanding that in the end of things, all reviewers are people. They're all human beings, and everybody responds to each one of these things in different ways. And they put different value on each of these, or different weight on them. And that's also true for different types of grant proposals. Okay, so ethos is your credibility. Funders, people who review your grants, may want to know about this because they want to be reassured that your proposal will work and that you'll be responsible with their funds. Basically, it means, are you credible? In terms of asking for funding for a program you have already, that can be demonstrating your results, your years of service doing something. If you're the authority on your topic, that kind of thing. Credibility can also be subconsciously, it can also be reinforced subconsciously if somebody's reading your proposal by things like grammar and spelling. in the greater business of the world, are grammar and spelling very important? Some people say absolutely, and other people say, well, no, not really. But in the grant world, yeah, they are. And the reason is because subconsciously, even if somebody gets what you're saying, it sends a message. If you submit something that has a lot of typos in it, sometimes subconsciously it can lead a reviewer to think, if you weren't careful enough with this, are you going to be careful enough with my funding? So that's how it impacts credibility. And again, a lot of that is subconscious. People don't even know they're doing it sometimes, but it's something that's there. Okay, pathos is our emotions. And you find a lot of time, pathos can be very important at a local level. A lot of people, are donors, or people give to, donor advised funds and things with the community foundation or other places have, or even private foundations, because they want to be doing good in the world. And a lot of times that comes down to emotional appeal of things. You see it less important in things like state and federal, but in the end of it, it's good to still try to work them in there too, because it is still people reading your proposal. This is where things like testimonials may come in, examples of how you've improved situations or lives in addition to number of people you've served. That may be helpful. It's important for everybody, even it's something that you can accomplish even if you're not happening to serve puppy dogs. It can come up in pretty much any kind of proposal. The subconscious things that can impact this, I thought this was interesting, are things like font choices and colors and using pictures. I read a study once a while ago. I don't know who put this out, but I heard somewhere that if you use serif fonts like Times New Roman, that's more appealing to male reviewers than sans serif fonts, which are things like, Calibri and Arial. Those apparently are more, if you're like thinking you're going to have a lot of women reviewing your grant, that may be more appealing to them. I really don't know the science behind that. It was just a study I had heard, and it was a discussion I had with a client the other day, because they're applying to something that relates, it's very heavily science and very heavily tech, and they were trying to decide what font to use, and we actually wound up having a 10-minute conversation about it. So there's a lot of details that go into things. Using pictures is great. A lot of times now when you apply for things online, you really can't control your font choices. You can't control your pictures, but you can upload attachments. And if you can upload pictures that are very compelling and help you tell your story in good ways, in ways that are useful, definitely consider using those. Okay, and logos, of course, is how it sounds. It's logic, it's data. Some people just really want to know the facts and they want to know the data. In grant writing, you can use this because facts, if you're applying for help with something that is a program you've been doing for a long time, you can talk about your success rates, you can talk about your data, you can talk about the need data for your community. If it's a new project you're doing, a lot of times it's possible to find studies online that talk about how things are impacted and in the wider world. Like, there could be studies out there that talk about how XYZ intervention helps youth, and this is the data around it. And if that's the intervention you want to propose trying to use, then you can cite that as a source for, this is why we want to do this, and this is a fact that helps us show we'll be able to produce some impact with the grant you give us. It applies especially to budgets. There are people who like to review grants who are they're very detail oriented, and they'll be able to see, does the information on your budget page match up to where you talk about how you're going to use money in other parts of your application. So it's good to be very careful when you review your proposals and look and make sure that everything matches, because for some people that's important. If it doesn't all match up, then it will raise questions for them. All right. So which do you think is more important? If anyone wants to sort of put an idea in the chat of which of the three of these they think is more important. Olivia, I just saw your message. I don't have a source for that hypothesis, but I will try to find it and get it to you somehow after the fact, because now I'm very curious about that too. But anyway, you can either say which you think of these is more important, or even just think to yourself which one is more important. A lot of times for people, the answer you would come up with, which is more important, might be based a lot on the type of writing that you respond to the most. You may be you may be a numbers person, and to you want to know about logos. You might be, more inclined to pathos if you're more inclined to messages that tug on your heartstrings. The real answer is that they kind of are all important, and at different levels of proposals, you're going to want to rely on different things. The more science and technology oriented the funder you're applying to is, you definitely are going to want more logos. The more competitive things are, ethos and credibility becomes extra important, because if the field is crowded and you want to make yours stand out, you want to be able to assure them that you'll be able to spend your money in a timely manner and be a good partner to work with when they fund you. This is especially true of like state or federal funding organizations. And so one person had asked ahead, how do I show long-term impact? And some of the examples we just gave are sort of a good help for that. It might mean that you need to start gathering data long-term for your program if you don't have that already. But the good thing is you get to define what long-term impact is. I work with an organization right now that helps homeless people, and they have decided that for them, long-term impact means somebody is stably housed for at least 6 months. So they can measure, of the people they help, how long are they housed for? I mean, how many of them meet that 6-month mark? To some people that might not sound very long, but to folks that are chronically homeless, that can be a very long time. And they have determined in their field that that's a meaningful level of long-term impact for them. Another thing too is if you're starting something new and you have something and you're trying to build up a case for what long-term means for your field, you might want to look at studies to see look for studies that show what the long-term benefit of your subject matter and your approach is, and try to use that to sort of support how you will approach what's considered long-term. And again, if you're the person who submitted that question ahead and you have follow-up questions, we can talk about that more at the end again. I want this to be as useful for y'all as possible. Okay, so another way to look at some of the same questions is, what are some mistakes you can make? How do you not get funded? And one of those things is applying to the wrong funder. And what I mean by that is not understanding the fit in their mission. Sometimes on paper or on the surface of things, a funder can look like the perfect fit for what you're trying to do. Or just on a very global level, they may say, yes, we are interested in, museums that stimulate, the creative process for youth. And you say, great, I have a museum that stimulates the creative process for youth. But then you find out they only provide funding to museums in the Midwest, and here we are in Tompkins County. They would not be the right funder. And a lot of times it's not readily apparent. One time I was working with a childcare organization, and we thought we found the great fit. Even in everything we were reading, it said they funded childcare programs, they funded new childcare programs. This was an organization trying to grow. They wanted construction money. We didn't find out till after we had submitted a pre-application and had a follow-up conversation that they didn't want to fund bricks and mortar. They only wanted to fund programs. So it was good that we found it out when we did, before they got any further into the process, because they would have been even more frustrated. So you got to do some vetting carefully ahead of time. There's some things on here like skipping the questions, ignoring details in the questions in the application. You should always do your best to answer questions. If you don't understand them and you have an opportunity to reach out to somebody like Gloria and ask ahead of time what they mean by this, you can get some help with that. Answering them out of order means you might have a spot to write a long narrative, and they may have asked a bunch of questions that they want you to answer in the narrative. And you might think, well, this is pretty repetitive. I'll just write it this other way because it sounds better and the flow is better. This is something I did back when I started, and I got told by the grant review team that that was not a good thing to do because they wanted, basically the way the reviewer, what the reviewer said to me is, do you want to write the great American novel or do you want to get funded? Which was sort of an ouch moment, but it really drove the point home. And clearly 30 years later, I still have not forgotten that. And the reason is when you're a reviewer, you are looking for information from a lot of work. You're reviewing a lot of applications. They're not just looking at your application, they're looking at maybe dozens. And if they're trying to get through it and see if everything is answered and consider the value of your questions in a balance of being careful and thoughtful and expeditious, they're going to do that best if you're not making them look around or dig for the answers to the questions. So answer things in order, even if it feels repetitive. Sometimes when details and questions look repetitive, if you look closer, you can see that maybe they're just a little bit different. And that means the answer needs to be just a little bit different. Sometimes they really are just very repetitive. State and federal grants can be like that. And you do just really have to say the same thing over and over again. So those are some things to be real careful about in this kind of writing. Again, typos, grammatical errors. You don't want to miss the deadline. Again, some things like local funders will be forgiving and they will say things like submit it. And if you have attachments you need to send us later, that's fine. I find that different foundations and, smaller, more intimate organizations are more likely to be like that. Other things like federal and state things, there's a portal. If you miss that deadline, they will shut that portal and you will be sad because you'll have just spent a lot of time trying to get a grant application together and you will not be able to get that time out of your life back. And they have so many applicants, they can't make exceptions. The deadline will be shut. You want to be compelling. You want to communicate well. The last two dashes on here are really about communicating with, your grant funders, your grant donors. It kind of goes back to that idea of they don't just write a check. Like Gloria said, that the relationship beyond that. If you have a grant and you're running into a situation where you're not going to be able to spend it like you thought, or program details have shifted, you really want to communicate with the program manager about what's going on and come up with a solution for how to, move forward with your project or spend the funding in some other way that's going to be meaningful. You want to communicate those things as much as you can prior to a report being due. If there are grant reports, try to do them and get them in on time. And just, do a good job cultivating that relationship because, a lot of times once you get a grant with a donor, they want to be a partner and see what your organization does and how well it grows and help you more down the road. And you want to be able to foster that opportunity as much as you can. Okay. So one person had asked ahead where to find tools for grant writing. And this is one place that may have some of those things. I'm going to have some more about finding grant funds tools for that in a minute here. The yellow circled area here is just sort of, it's a couple of pages of these kinds of things or what they consider best practices for a good grant in terms of seeking grants and applying for grants. This organization is one that I'm a member of. It's a membership organization that if you write proposals for your organization, you can join. They've got different levels. It's pretty helpful. They've got a lot of different trainings, webinars. There's this forum they have called Grant Zone where people can just write a question. How do you deal with this situation? And then other people in the field, our colleagues, can all respond. People belong to this who work for nonprofits. People belong to this who are private consultants like me. There's a searchable engine there too to find a consultant if you need to work with a consultant. And in terms of other tools, somebody else asked, how do I find out where to get funding? So this chart, okay, this slide and the next slide, my apologies for running through all of this so fast. Sometimes this business, the business of prospecting, I've done like 3-hour-long sessions just on this. So I'm just giving you some links here and some tools to use really quickly today. If you are in Tompkins or Cortland County, they've done this for a long time. The Human Service Coalition would have a directory on their website that sort of lists some of the most common funders that they know of that fund programs in our region. If you are from a small organization, especially, you may have a harder time competing for funding on a national level, or your organization may not be big enough yet that you are affiliated at the state level. Getting local grassroots support may be where you are at and where you're starting, and this is a good tool for that. So federal funds and state funds, they both have these extensive, kind of tricky to navigate, but they're there, these portals. Grants.gov is the federal one, and Grants Gateway is the state level one. You can use those to search for different things by subject. You can use it to search for what might be coming up by different departments of these levels of government. And sometimes they'll talk about things that were funded in the past. So you can just sort of do some digging that way to find out, all right, well, who funds, mental health in New York State, or who might have mental health programs for youth opportunities coming up in the next year at the federal level. You can use it for that. Grant applications to the federal government and New York State government also require some sort of pre-qualification. So if you've applied for things at the federal level, you probably have seen a notice that you have to have a unique identity identifier and a SAM registration. SAM stands for System for Award Management. If you're used to getting funds from the federal government, you probably have a SAM number already, and you just need to make sure it's updated. If it's not something you've done before, it's a process. It takes a few weeks, sometimes a couple months to get one. So the time to apply for that is not when you're ready to apply for a grant, because you might hit the deadline in the portal, and if your SAM isn't approved, you won't be able to apply. So it's a good thing to check out and look at if you think you're going to be applying for federal level things. Check it out and try to find one and start that early. In New York State, it's similar. It's called Grants Gateway. Grants Gateway is it's another system of pre-qualification for nonprofits in New York State that everyone in New York State to get federal fundings through this portal has to get. I will say that I do think there are ways that don't go through the portal, that sometimes people have gotten around that, but by and large, most agencies in New York State require you to be pre-registered through Grants Gateway. In addition to these different portals, you can do just searches of different departments of specific agencies. And sometimes, like especially in New York State, they will list right on their website, these are the procurement opportunities we have open right now. These are the requests for proposals we have open. Sometimes you can see a list of ones going farther back, so you can get a sense of, well, this isn't out right now, but maybe it will be later. And then just sort of, if you're trying to do looking for some information about private organizations and maybe what their giving practices are, GuideStar is a site that will do that. You can enter an organization and it will lead to whatever information they've provided there, including sometimes their IRS 990s, which is their donor forms. And sometimes on those, in the back of those, you will be able to see a list for a given year of who they made grants to and what dollar amounts. And you can use that to sort of look and see if there's a giving pattern. If like a family foundation maybe gives to the same 5 organizations over and over and over again, and nobody else, you'll know that that's what their funding preferences are. And maybe that's not going to be a good new try for you, because they just don't verify, they don't vary very much. funders also can change their priorities. So when you look at giving practices, it's not 100% predictive, because they can change their emphasis or their focus over time. So be aware of that too. All right, those were free resources. There's some other ones too that are databases that are searchable. Some of these have free login versions. Some of them have paid versions. I have memberships to Foundation Center and Grant Station myself. I have one to Instrumental, but I really haven't used it because mostly I use the other ones. And they're searchable databases, and you can get a ton of information that way, but they're very much drilling down in deeper dives. You can put in a couple of parameters like, I am looking for somebody that funds animal care organizations in New York State, and you'll get a huge list of those, but they may not all be appropriate to our area or our region, or maybe they only give in New York City, or maybe they give to research and not your program and what you want as program. So it takes a lot of digging, but they are resources to begin looking out. All right, so here are some previously submitted strategy questions that Gloria had gathered. I'm going to start moving into some Q&A. So I see that there's some questions living in chat that, thank you, Gloria. Gloria is moderating. So these are some others that came up early, and they're all really good questions. So thank you for sending them. In response to the first one, I would say yes, that's a very appropriate approach. If your grant size, if the funders have stated that their limit is some dollar amount, don't ask for more than the dollar amount. Just ask for what that is. If it doesn't fund your whole project, then you'll need to show how you're going to make up the balance of that. If you are a new applicant, it is a bona fide strategy to ask for whatever their entry level amount seems to be. This question seems to be asked by somebody who's done some of this research and has learned enough to know that what their average grant size is. So that's my yes, but I will also say that there are times that might not be true. You might want to do some research. Their parameters may have changed. And more important than asking me, you should ask the funder if you can. Many are approachable, especially foundation folks. Like, I mean, Gloria's having coffee chats, for crying out loud. I wish everybody would do that, because it makes it so much easier and so much less mystifying for people who are, you know, just trying to get through this hurdle just so they can do their program. So thank you, Gloria, again, for being approachable. A lot of our other local folks, especially our local foundation people, are also worth reaching out to and talking about your project and asking. If you do, the only other thing I'll say about this top one is, again, if you do ask for less than what your project size is, just make sure you have thought about and have a strategy that you can demonstrate for how you'll come up with the rest of the funds. You know, are you going to fundraise for it? Are you going to ask X, Y, and Z other funders in the next 6 months? How are you going to do it? Okay, so the next question asks for capital expenditures. Should you talk about what the goals are for the building component or for the long-term goals? Definitely talk about the long-term goals. Things like walls and roofs, those are deliverables and they belong on your timeline. And you do need to show that the funding is going to get spent in a certain period of time. A lot of times funders will have deadlines, like you have, if you get a contract, it has to be spent in yay so many years. So you're going to need to show that. But definitely really, they're going to want to also be exacting positive change in the world. The reason they're giving you the money to build your building, maybe it's housing, is because they want to see that people have stable housing and they want to know something about what their outcomes are going to be down the road. So the more you can talk about that, definitely, absolutely do that. And it kind of goes back to all the stuff we were saying about the 3 Aristotle arguments. Use that. Okay, someone had asked specifically about lead poisoning reduction through HUD. And I will say that I have not applied to that one. That's not a program that I am familiar with specifically, but I can tell you what I would do. I would start by researching its past. I would use HUD.gov, maybe, Get a sense of when it's coming out, how often that grant comes out. Is it an annual one? Is it one they do every 4 years? Is it something they did once and they're never going to do again? I don't think that's true. I think they do that one every so often. But find out when it is. If you don't have a SAM, make sure you get one, or make sure it's up to date. Look for the last request for proposals that came out so you can review the questions, find out what kinds of things they ask. At the federal level, questions may change a little from year to year, but a lot of times the basic ones are the same. So it can start to give you an idea, what do you have in place already? How good of a fit you are? What do you need to develop more? And you can also talk to colleagues at other organizations who have applied for this before and have been successful. A lot of times they will, tell you what they found out, what they had to do, and give you some information that way. That may be helpful too. All right. And then the last one's a very, very good question. Additional capacity is a big deal for nonprofits, especially ones with small staffs that wear many hats. And it depends. The answer for this really, in sort of the grant piece of it, it really kind of just depends on who you're asking. What's the grant for? What the source is? Some things like some of the clients I work with that we're applying to some federal level building infrastructure law grants now, like we're building in project people. If you can build in program staff time, if you can build in a position to run your program, maybe that's what you do. So that means your time would go towards the tracking and the other sort of components that are around managing the money. Sometimes you can build in some of the costs that would compensate some of that, like reporting, auditing costs, things that are part of that extra capacity that are mentioned, that the submitter mentioned. That's sort of the grant part of it. Really, overall, though, it's a good idea to consider. Maybe if your organization's at a crossroads in terms of your growth and your capacity, that happens a lot. You do something for a while, and then, the question comes about: should we grow? How do we grow? And it may wind up being just sort of a bigger conversation with your board around that. And for this last one, I will add that the Community Foundation is a source that will provide grants that are for operational expenses. If the financial resource to cover these operational expenses, like reporting, audits, is part of the concern there, that may be a way to partially address this problem that might or might not feel appropriate to you. All right, so those were the questions we got ahead. And I appreciate your humor with me sort of rushing through everything pretty quickly. And I'm glad to hear your questions now. And actually, I'm going to do that.
Thank you, Stacey. That was
Thank you.
fantastic. Lots and lots of great, wonderful information. So like Stacey said, she did cover the questions that we got ahead of time. So if you do have any other questions, please write them in the chat, and Stacey would be happy to answer those questions. There was a comment from Renee. So whomever the lead question came from, she's happy to talk to them about that. Let's see. Letitia, thank you. She's got some templates that you can use. So if you're looking for some templates, reach out to Letitia at ILH. What does that say? ILHAN-US.com.
That's terrific. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Bethany says, thank you. So we'll wait 1 or 2 minutes for you to come up with some questions. But I do want to invite Robin for just a minute or two to talk a little bit about the CAPS grants, Community Arts Partnerships grants. So Robin, go right ahead.
Hi, I'll make it really quick. I'm Robin. I'm the Program and Grant Director of the Community Arts Partnership of Tompkins County, and we have state money. Every county in the state has this money for 3 grants. One is for events, one is for artists to do new work and share it with the community, and one is for artists going into the schools or after-school programs to teach their art form. I'll put our both our website, artspartner.org, in the chat so that you can join our mailing list at the bottom of that page, but I'll also put the page that has all our grant material. They'll be due in January for 2024. I have not updated the information yet, but I will be doing at least 10 grant writing workshops throughout the county, some on Zoom, some at libraries all over, and they are specific to our grants. We also have an SOS grant, which is for specific opportunities for artists. So I will just put that information in the chat right now for everyone.
Okay. Thank you, Robin, for sharing that information. I'm always really impressed with the work that the Community Arts Partnership does, because they are a large and awesome, amazing team of 2.
Yeah.
So,
I think we have 2.1 now. We have a 10-hour-a-week person helping with social media. 2.1.
wonderful. 2.1. All right. It looks like we have a question from, oop, did I just lose it? Okay, my chat screen is going crazy here.
I think I saw one from Dan.
I did, but it went away on, okay, so for grants that will fund operating expenses, have unrestricted funds, do you find you are more likely to be successful asking for funding for operating expenses, or will specific programs, projects be favored?
Gloria, do you want to talk about how the foundation has
I
been
sure
handling this
can.
since you
As I was
since
reading
you
the
shifted
question,
to
I was
that?
like, wait a second.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great
So,
opportunity.
So within the last few years, we have leaned towards operating unrestricted grant funding, and that's part of our commitment to trust-based philanthropy. So we are now, I guess, leaning away or steering away from more projects where most of those grant funding, if they are project related, then it is specific to that project, and that money is tied to that project, and you can't use it for anything else. So if an organization has to pivot for whatever reason, or an emergency came up, they wouldn't be able to use that funding. So in our grant agreements and overall everything that we're doing, our funds are unrestricted. So we are granting to the organization, and we look at the organization rather than just the project. George, do you want to add anything? I got the thumbs up. So Dan, I hope that answers your question. Robin added some information to the chat about the Community Arts Partnership. And if no one has anything else, I think we'll close it up. Well, thank you, Stacey, so much for the wealth of information you've shared. Lots and lots of great information. My hope is that everyone on this call, everyone who's watching, learned some, tips and tricks for how to strengthen their application, not just to us, which little plug here, our grant cycle opens up tomorrow. Not just to us, but to other funding opportunities as well. Thank you for, everyone on this call for spending time with us today. Please copy and paste the entire chat. So start from the beginning to the end and copy the entire chat, because there's lots of good information there. Links to register for our grant cycle, which is tomorrow, links to the great links that Stacey shared, I put in the chat for you. So please go ahead and do that. Or if there's anything that we at the Community Foundation can help with, I'm going to put my email in the chat as well. Please reach out to us. And again, thank you so much, Stacey. Thank you so much, everyone, for being on the call. George, do you want to lead us out?
Thank you all for what you do in our community. You make it a better place, and we are happy to be a partner in that. And we cheerlead you on and celebrate the wonderful ways in which you gain the resources you need to do to have the impacts that you do. And we're happy to partner with you.
Great.
Thank you all for your
so
time
much.
today.
Yeah, and hopefully I'll see you on the coffee chat every Tuesday, 12:30 to 1 at Duncan, right on what's that street? I always get it mixed up. Meadows or Fulton, one of them. Meadows, South Meadow Street. 12:30 on Tuesdays up until October 11th when our grant cycle ends. So thank you all so much. Have a wonderful afternoon and hope to see you again soon. Thank you all.
You.